So, what is flow teaching and learning? Flow has three strands and two foundations. It's based on research, what makes great teaching, the EEF toolkit, Rosenshine's principle of instruction, and more. It was developed ahead of the new Ofsted framework, but if you look at the quality of education section, you can see a clear correlation between the two, since great teaching is great teaching. In the past, many schools created tick lists based on Ofsted criteria about what makes an outstanding lesson, and teachers jumped through hoops to cram in the FHS, ES or Waden 10 or the Walmer Hill dozen. Flow is not a tick list of things that you must do in every lesson, but rather a framework of elements that when used appropriately will put learning into the right sequence, scaffold it so it's both accessible but challenging enough to hold interest, test knowledge and skill, and be responsive to the learner's journey. So before I take you on a journey to describe the different elements of flow, this is what the theory of flow is.
Flow theory in less than 5 minutes, I promise. It was the first game of the 1992 NBA Championship Series. The Portland Trail Blazers were pulling ahead of the Chicago Bulls when Phil Jackson called a timeout. Michael Jordan emerged from this timeout with a sense of intense concentration. And though it didn't seem like a big deal at the time, he would then go on in the next 18 minutes to hit 6 three-pointers. At one point, he looked to the sidelines and shrugged his shoulders, seemingly surprised by his own success. He later described this experience as being in the zone. Now, players in every sport describe this similar experience of being in the zone, where they tune out the crowd and the noise and the distractions and just play at their top performance. But it isn't limited to sports. Artists and authors, musicians, engineers, composers, they all experience this same sense of being in the zone. It's a strange paradox where time seems to stand still, and yet it seems to be over in an instant. It feels effortless even though you're facing an extreme challenge. There's a sense of relaxation, but it's also intense. You seem more present than ever, but you also seem to lose your entire sense of self. You've probably experienced this before, when you were so engaged in a task that you lost track of time and place. There's a term for this. It's called being in a state of flow. And if we want students to be fully empowered to own the creative process, to engage in deep and meaningful work, well, then we need to understand what it means for students to reach this state of flow. Although the idea of flow has existed for thousands of years, flow theory began in the 1970s and 80s when Hungarian psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi became fascinated by artists who were so lost in their creative work that they would lose track of time and even ignore food, water, and sleep. And through his research, he noticed a similar experience with scientists and athletes and authors and all kinds of people who engaged in meaningful work. It was a state of hyper-focus and complete engagement, and he described it as optimal experience. Researchers do not have one single working model for flow theory, but there are a few factors that the theorists have described as being vital for achieving the state of flow. Number one, it needs to be a task that you find intrinsically rewarding. You're not going to hit a state of flow while necessarily, mowing the yard or cleaning toilets, unless that's your jam. Number two, you need clear goals and a sense of progress. It helps if you are actually setting the goals yourself. Number three, the task needs clear and immediate feedback. You need to know what you're doing and where you're going. Number four, the challenge must match the perceived skills. This requires a sense of personal control or agency over the task. In 1987, researchers published the 8-channel model of flow shown here, and notice that if a task is too easy, you might experience apathy or boredom, but if a task seems too hard, you'll be anxious. The goal is to match both the skill level and the task at hand. And number 5, it requires intense focus on the present moment. So what does this actually mean for schools? Well, here are a few ideas. Number 1, tap into intrinsic motivation. Find tasks that students will want to do rather than tasks that they simply have to do. Number 2, embrace student choice and agency. Whenever possible, allow them to own their learning. Number 3, provide the right scaffolding so that students can match the challenge level to their ability levels, or at least their perceived ability levels. Number 4, minimize distractions so that students can focus on their learning. It helps to change the pacing so that you have fewer tasks and more time to accomplish it. And number 5, help students learn to monitor their own progress through metacognition. Teach them to set goals, analyze tasks, figure out what they need to do, make adjustments in the moment, and reflect on their progress at hand.
So, as teachers, we need to understand the key elements of the flow framework and be able to choose the right strategy at the right time to deliver the right amount of challenge compared to the level of skill being demonstrated by our students. Out of the 6 components of great teaching in the Sutton Trust's What Makes Great Teaching, 2 of them are identified as having the strongest impact on outcomes. Subject knowledge and pedagogy comes out as number 1 on their list and includes things like content knowledge, understanding how students think about that content, knowing the order in which it needs to be taught, and the vocabulary that underpins it. Here are a couple examples. First, knowing common misconceptions. In geography, a common misconception is that the reason for it being hotter at the equator is that it's nearer to the sun. A more significant reason is that the sun's energy is more concentrated at the equator due to the curvature of the Earth. A strong teacher will know the common misconceptions in their subject and plan for these so that students don't get caught by them. The second example is about sequencing. In this pretty obvious example, you can imagine the consequences if you got this sequence wrong. Apply this to the maths curriculum and the same principle applies. In subject passion and pedagogy, teachers need to understand the correct sequence in which students need to learn a topic or series of topics and plan for this accordingly. To introduce responsive teaching, I wanted to tell you a story about my driving visits to a friend's in Devon back in the late 1980s in my dad's Ford Escort. And here is the one, me cleaning the very same car after that journey. To get there safely, my dad instructed me to drive no faster than 60 miles per hour, which I dutifully did. It took hours, and gave me a set of written direction notes that I pinned to the dashboard. Invariably, even back then, you would end up in one of these, or take a wrong turn, stop, get out the map, work out where you were, and then how to get back onto the route. How different to now. Live data and traffic data means that the best route is chosen. This is updated as new information comes in and you are offered an alternative, quicker route. And if you take a wrong turn, the system automatically finds a way to get you back en route. This is the idea behind responsive teaching. We don't use gimmicky AFL techniques, but instead use reliable, regular, low-stakes checking of learning to keep students on course and make adjustments to our lessons as necessary. The power of planning and explanation. This includes how we use direct instruction, modelling, scaffolding, practice, and so on. It also incorporates strategies that aid memory retention. Hermann Ebbinghaus in 1885 did an experiment which showed how we lose memory over time. He found that over a few days, your memory of something you had learnt drops to 40%, and by the time a month passes, you would remember nothing. So, a key aspect of the power of explanation is spaced repetition, the planned revisiting of information to embed learning into memory. Possibly most notably seen as an example through our Do It Now tasks, which ensure that we revisit questions and information at the start of each of our lessons. High expectations and professional relationships. Having high expectations, having belief in our students, and body language is proven to have an impact on outcomes. In one experiment that proved this, 2 groups of Asian women of equal ability were given a maths test. Prior to the test, one half of the group were put in a frame of mind which exaggerated their gender and the stereotype that women generally perform worse in maths tests than men. The second group were put in a frame of mind that exaggerated their Asian identity and the stereotype that Asians are high achievers in maths. The second group, who had belief in their ability, consistently outperformed the first. In another experiment, analysis of tests taken by Black Americans before Obama being elected and then again after showed that on average, test scores increased post-Obama. Psychologists believe that the effect of having such a powerful role model demonstrating the potential to achieve had the ripple effect of belief for people of colour that played out in academic achievement rising. In 1963, Robert Rosenthal conducted this experiment in an elementary school. The team tested all of the students in the class for potential intelligence growth, and the teachers were given the results. Sam, Sally, and Sarah were identified as having off-the-chart intelligence and potential for growth. The teachers were told they must not communicate this to the students, and they were not to treat them any differently. At the end of the year, they were tested again, and indeed, Sam, Sally, and Sarah were again scoring off the charts. The reality is that in the first tests, Sam, Sally, and Sarah had not tested off the charts, but were wonderfully ordinary. But 2 things had happened. The belief that teachers had in the students had been unwittingly and non-verbally communicated. The students had digested these messages and had transformed them into reality. This is why high expectation and belief is central to this foundation. The SMILE experiment demonstrates the power of body language. And I'd like to challenge you to sit opposite someone and instruct them that under no circumstances must they smile for the duration of the exercise. They must do this while looking directly at you, while you put on the best smiley face that you possibly can. I'm going to ask you to do that now, and we'll pause the video while you get organised. So, how long did it take for them to break out into a smile? The chances are not very long. Long before the smile reaches their face, their brain is mirroring what they see on your face. It's very hard to disrupt this and stop your body following what your brain is trying to make happen. Body language in the classroom is important. Exceptional behaviour for learning and professional relationships. In the EEF guidance on improving behaviour, knowing your students and building relationships is first on their list of recommendations. Routines such as greeting students by the door and having an activity ready as soon as they arrive, and doing this consistently across the school, are evidence-based strategies for improving behaviour. It takes 3 positive interactions, experiences, or comments to just cancel out the effect of 1 negative. And recent research has shown that the optimum number of positive to negative when motivating teams is actually 6 to 1. EEF research suggests that 5 deliberate and strength-specific praise to 1 negative in the classroom is recommended. And so if we are looking to build high-quality, positive professional relationships, this is the ratio that we need to aim for. As I said at the start, flow is a framework, but some schools are now building in habits that reinforce the techniques that will lead to flow happening, as can be seen here by the habits introduced by Farnham Heath End School. To finish, just to reinforce that flow is a framework. It allows teachers to have autonomy over what they feel is the best professional practice at the time, and it's based on research. Please do take the time to have a look through the flow strategy.